Hello and welcome back, and that is right, it's time for HexOS. Today we have got Jonathan Panoza, the CEO of EshTech and the joint creator of HexOS, some software that we've been talking about for a wee while. And we've got a big pile of questions here. All of your questions are going to be put to him today. And in this video, we're going to be covering a few things. Number one, we're going to be seeing probably, I believe, might be the world's first demo here of HexOS, at least on YouTube. I don't know. I haven't looked out the window recently. And after that, we're going to be going through your questions. On top of that as well, just before we start today's video, a few things. Number one, some of the questions that you guys have sent have actually been covered very recently in some Reddit posts. They've been covered on an official TrueNAS post that went out, and HexOS's first blog post as well. So some of these have been covered, but we're including them anyway because you may have missed them. Secondly, these questions were sent to John P. or Jonathan Panoza, whichever way you'd like to be called in this video, 3 days ago. So he's had a few days to prepare. This isn't just these are your questions, answer them. And lastly, I'm just getting over a virus. So if I lose my voice, he will cover this whole video, and I bequeath him the channel. But apart from that, John, thanks for joining us here today. I believe you've got a lot to talk about, haven't you?
We have a lot to cover. Your audience came up with some really great questions, really good, interesting questions that I think a lot of people have shared. So I'm eager. I'm eager to talk about it more. Yeah.
Okay, let's fire on with that demo, baby. I'm just sitting here. I'm waiting to watch it with everyone else.
Here we go. Let me share my screen here for you. Oops. Scroll this down a little, and there we go. Okay. Can you see this okay?
Hello, Robbie again here. I'm just editing this video right now, a day later, and unfortunately we have encountered something of a problem. The share screen that John was providing with us was an incredibly large scale monitor with an incredible resolution, which for those in the know will know is a nightmare when it comes to editing. Luckily, within 24 hours, John was able to supply us with some re-recorded footage at a much more usable resolution here. So what you're seeing here on screen when we're showing HexOS, as John gives our demonstration, we're seeing actually a recording taking place afterwards. It's the same screens, but there may be the slightest difference in terms of what he is pointing at and what you see there on screen. But take my word for it, it's exactly the same thing, but just a better resolution. Okay, let's crack back on with the recording.
Right. Well, the first step, let me just set the stage as to where you're at in the process so that people know when you're going to be coming to this screen. So we are going to have our own ISO for installation media, and that installation media, once you install it and boot up the server for the first time, it'll make an outbound connection to our VPS so that it can register itself as claimable. And from there, you'll need to create an account and log in to what we're calling the HexOS command deck, which is deck.hexos.com. And upon logging in, we will actually enter into the setup wizard. And the very first step in that wizard is to detect any servers that are on the LAN with your browser device that have yet to be claimed. So you can see I have a couple of servers here. I'm going to go ahead and claim .126. And to claim the system, you do have to enter in the admin password that you created during the bare metal installation. Once you do that, we are actually then given API access to control the system for you, and that's where everything else is driven from there. The very next screen that we take you into is the health and capabilities screen. And the main purpose of this screen is to make sure that all of the hardware that you're expecting to show up is present and that there are no issues with any of the features or hardware that you're trying to use. So for example, if there were problems with individual drives, those would show up. And as an FYI, I'm very well aware that these are not ideal drives for a ZFS pool, and we will have error messages for SMR drives or SMR drives to not be recommended by default for this use case. So there's some conditionals and evaluators that we're still building in to the software, but this is the screen that those types of messages would show up. Same thing if we detected that there was an existing file system on a device. We want to make users aware of that in case there's data that they're about to purge and they're not aware of, or if there's any smart errors that are past the threshold of what we would consider to be acceptable or tolerable. Awesome. Next up, we've got the actual pool configuration itself. And for this, we do this automatically for the user. A lot of mistakes can be made at this step and in any ZFS deployment. And so making sure that these settings are configured optimally is really important. We are actually not just working with the team at TrueNAS on this, but we're even working with the team at Clara Systems, who have an incredible amount of background on ZFS and expertise in creating enterprise storage systems. So getting their guidance on not only how these pools should be configured from this is how we should put the drives together, but also what those immutable settings should be for when you're creating those storage pools. All of that is being configured and optimized by the brightest in this space. So those drives are automatically configured. The next thing that we're going to do is create any additional local user accounts that we might need. So for those that are savvy enough, this is really referring to Samba. So if you wanted to add a Samba user, let's say I'm going to add Robbie here and make him a user on the system. So I can just add that account, and now he's an additional local user that will be on the system. Next up, as you would probably expect, folders. So if I want to create a folder for Robbie to store his stuff, I can go ahead and do that. I can select which storage pool I want that to be on, whether I want it private or not, what kind of access I want to give him, and go ahead and add that folder. And then lastly, we just got to give this thing a name, which we'll call it Hex1, confirm that I know I'm going to be purging data away, review all the configuration settings, and we're off to the races. This process here can take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes. Depends on the number of drives you have, the number of folders you're creating. But this is part of the magic of HexOS. It's going through and batching all of the jobs that you would normally have to do one by one on a traditional scale deployment, because it's built for an IT-centric mindset. This is going through and doing all of that work, very akin to what you would expect when you're installing, say, Windows on a desktop. So if you've got questions at this point, this is a great time to answer them, because we're going through.
Looks like I'm about to run out of time.
Yeah.
About to finish. So do you know what? I know this video is about other people's questions, but straight away. So number one, real simple point, actually, very early doors. During the hard drive recommendation stage there, it was making recommendations towards the storage configuration. Can you reject those and personalize them to your own setup needs?
In the current internal build, no, but that is a plan.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to. So, for example, one of the things that we do intend to support is the ability to configure a hot spare. So you might not want all of the hard drives just directly put in the pool. Maybe you want to keep one on the side as a hot spare. So that's absolutely something that we have planned.
Awesome. And I was going to say, when you mentioned about the potential later down the line to reject certain drive types, again, shingled magnetic recorded drives and such, verification of drives. So say Seagate rolls out a new 26 TB drive tomorrow and someone just manages to get hold of them, they're on an early list. Will they be able to utilize drives like that within HexOS, or will there be an adherence to a verified storage drive list?
You're getting so far ahead of my roadmap. I'm very impressed. So one of the values and one of the advantages of having a hosted UI for this is that we can build a database that we can maintain server side that can do things like check for those two new types of devices. So all right, I'm going to put some of my dev teams on notice here by saying this, but what I ideally would like to see is that if a new drive comes out and we haven't had a chance to verify and come up with best practice recommendations for it, and you get into the wizard, it's going to be kind of a swim at your own risk type warning. Whereas if we know that the device type is known and good and used in configurations and we're getting expected results, then there'd be a green check mark saying, hey, good job. You picked good hardware. So that's my intention. We really want this to be smarter than just, here's a system in a completely offline state with no internet access, figure out whether or not you picked the right hardware. We want to go the next step and say, yeah, this was a good selection. Yeah, this was a good choice.
And you know what? You've almost touched on it there. Let's get to the elephant in the room. Why online? A lot of your online marketing has seemingly indicated very early doors about, whoa, what's your data doing on the cloud? Get it out of the cloud. It's not safe. What are you doing there? And a lot of that ethos, and now the product has arrived, and again, a lot of the indications and posts and stuff I saw online, it did seem that this was a pure web portal interface. So there was that dashboard that you would go in to do all of these things. And it did sound like there was the potential to access the system locally via the TrueNAS Scale kind of controls, et cetera, et cetera. But why online? And, is this the long-term plan? Just basically, yes, that to be comparing this against an online model, when a lot of users, the very reason they've erred towards a NAS system. I'm sort of touching the toes on one of the questions for later. Why this online doorway?
So this is going to be a long answer, because when we first started,
got a big drink. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when we first started on this mission, our thought originally was we really liked Plex's model. We thought, okay, they have a local UI and they have a hosted UI, and if you're on the LAN and you want to connect locally, you can do that, and if you want to connect remotely, you can do that. That seems like a good solution because it gets around a lot of the challenges with things like setting up secure remote access, which is always a bane for any new home server user. So that was the original thought process. And then when we got started, early on, we said, well, maybe the first thing we do is we just build a hosted UI and we'll worry about the local stuff later, because building two UIs is two projects. It's two sets of code and two different conditions too, right? Like we can rely on knowing that the server's online if it's a hosted UI, right? Because it's connected. Whereas if it's not, we can't rely on that. So all of these hosted or connected features that we want to build in wouldn't work on a local UI if the standard is it has to be able to work offline, right? So we thought, let's build the hosted one first because it's going to be more feature rich. It's going to be the more difficult one to build, and then we'll port something locally later on. And then as we continued on that journey, we started having some serious conversations about, well, what exact scenarios does the local UI benefit? Like where does that really provide a benefit? And so obviously the first thing people think of is, well, the internet's down, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, the internet's down, but that's not the only condition that has to be met for a local UI to be valuable. The internet has to be down and you have to be at home. If you're not at home, then it doesn't matter, right? So the internet has to be down and you have to be at home. Well, what else? Well, if someone can't install and configure HexOS because the internet's down, I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with that because you got to have the internet to even download the installation media. And I think most people, if they're going to do this, they're going to download the installation media, immediately plug it into their system, immediately get going. And if the internet goes down at that point, I mean, how long is the internet down on average? A couple of minutes. So you wait, comes back up, and then you complete your setup. So it's not, I think, as disruptive to the user prior to having the server set up. So then the second scenario is, okay, now the server's fully set up, all the applications are present, and the internet goes down. Now what? Well, everything that you've set up is still running locally. Plex is still running. All of your data is still there. You can connect and do everything that you could possibly want. So what would be the reason that you would need to log into the command deck when your internet's down? And so we started thinking about that. And it's like, well, what if a drive failed? And this will really get you. How would you know? If the internet's down and a drive fails, how do you know? What's generating the notification and how's it pushing to you if the internet's down? So assuming that, let's say, you had a PC speaker or some other method of knowing and you really needed to get in there, the next question was, well, wait a minute. The TrueNAS UI is there. Could they use that? And, in the perfect world, the whole reason we're building this thing is that we wanted to build a UI that's designed for the everyday user. TrueNAS is definitely a more IT-centric product. But for replacing a failed drive, would it be impossible to do or overly difficult to do? I don't think so. And even then, I would still say, if the internet's down and a drive has failed, everything's still running, and you could just wait for the internet to come back up to replace the drive. So I'm not saying that a offline UI doesn't provide any value. What we are saying is that it provides significantly less value than the hosted UI. And if we're going to build something local, it certainly isn't part of our mission for 1.0. It would be something after that. And to be fair, even after that, it would likely come in the form of, say, a Docker container that we would load after the configuration is complete that would provide a stripped down version of a local UI to give you basic controls like, can I start and stop apps? Can I restart the server? Can I replace a failed disk? But making grandiose configuration changes to your server when the internet's down, I just don't think that's super important for a home user. So I think, and then I'll go a step further with you though too. And I posted this on Reddit. I think this is when you talked about the post on Reddit. There's actually a lot of problems with local UI that I think most home server users today that are more IT centric, they accept those challenges. Like, okay, if I want to connect via HTTPS, a secure socket connection to a local domain, my browser is going to give me a nasty security warning. And it's going to do that even if I have a self-signed SSL cert. Now, savvy people are going to go, oh, I know, I click the advanced button and I go to the next screen and everything's fine after that. But again, we're targeting people that might not know that. And putting those kind of obstacles in their way is just not great. Furthermore, local DNS, I don't know how to say it. It just sucks. It's horrible. It's unreliable. And if the IP address changes and you're trying to connect via hostname, that could be a real challenge. So what we found is that our hosted UI solves for pretty much all of those problems. It works every single time. It doesn't matter what happens to your IP address. I mean, there's I could go on a tangent right now talking about how much easier it is to change network settings using a hosted UI, because in TrueNAS, when you make a network settings change, you have to log back into the TrueNAS UI after making the change, go to the network page and confirm that setting worked. Otherwise, within 60 seconds, it auto reverts. Well, with our hosted UI, when you make a network settings change, as soon as your server reconnects to our host, we know that it worked because you have an IP and you can get on the internet again. So we can immediately confirm those network settings. So it's the gift that keeps on giving to us in terms of providing a better user experience. So I totally get the criticism of not having a local UI day one. I don't think it's as critical as some people are making it out to be, and it's not something that we're completely ruling out. We would just need to see enough demand for it to justify it, and it would come sometime after the 1.0 release. So hope that answers your question. If there's follow-ups on that, I'm more
I was
than
going
happy
to say I've definitely got follow-ups. And I think it's unfair to commandeer this with my own questions, but I will say, one, I agree with you just on the idea of from a simplified user stance, it makes a lot of sense. We've seen it from the likes of Unify, we've seen it from WD and their NAS systems, Netgear and their NAS systems, where it started off as a web control, a kind of relay point there when it was getting set up. And I just think there are definitely going to be some users where there's just going to be this little pulse open at the back of the system that they're not happy with. But you're right, there's arguments for and against. This feels like I would be stomping on everyone else's question. I agree with, I would say 60 to 70% of what you said, but this isn't my video and these aren't my questions, so I've got to play ball. But I will say definitely, I think that is something that will be discussed hotly in the comments.
for sure.
But yeah, are you ready for the questions?
Yeah. Do you want me to finish this setup wizard so you can see the
Absolutely,
dashboard?
go for that. Actually, I apologize.
It's just one more click. So at this screen, this is the post screen after the setup is complete, after the provisioning step is complete. And right now, the only thing that we show here are a couple common applications that users might want to install. But realistically, there's a whole lot of other things that we would like to put on this screen to represent common things that we would expect users to want to do once they've gotten that provisioning step done. So after this, you click to go to the dashboard and you're there. You're off to the races.
Boom.
And what's really great about this dashboard is you also can add additional servers at any time. So we are planning for multi-server management, and there's a whole bunch of other features that will come into play the second that you have more than one system. And the design is fully responsive. So I am definitely testing my developers' patience by showing all of this right now. But the concept here is that if you're on mobile, this will be fully responsive. And the idea behind that, this is something that's really important to note. The reason responsive is so important to me personally is that a use case for this platform is you don't have a PC or a laptop already. You have nothing. And you want to create a server, but you want to double its use as a PC, maybe for editing video or something else. And in that context, being able to start up a VM and configure GPU pass-through so that you have a monitor light up and a keyboard light up and a mouse light up. Being able to do that through a mobile interface is really important if that's going to be that first desktop device on their network. So that's a big part of the reason that we wanted mobile. Plus, we have plans for native mobile apps, which I know is, I'm jumping ahead in the questions here because
No. I'll be honest. I really enjoyed that there. I was going to say, I feel like I'm stomping on everyone's questions, but I've got a lot. Just real quick with the app installations there. Will they have pre-configured folders? Say, for example, the curated ones like Plex and the like. Will they have pre-created shared folders there?
Yes. So I can't get into all the details just yet because we're in the throes of a lot of the design and development of apps right now. As I think you're aware, one of the big changes that TrueNAS went through this year was deprecating Kubernetes in exchange for Docker. So that's where we're at right now, is going through a lot of that work. But the plan is to curate applications, but it's more than just building the container and publishing it to a repo. It's about integrating the apps themselves into the same workflows that power the storage and the folder system in our product as well. So when you go to add an application, and let's say a folder that's needed for that application doesn't exist, we should be creating that folder automatically for the user and doing the volume mappings automatically for the user. And we have the advantage because we control the platform, right? We are in control of both the server, the storage platform, as well as the app platform. So we get that advantage of being able to templatize all that and create profiles for that.
Awesome. Okay, well, do you know what? I think we've made the people wait long enough. I say that. The very first question I'm looking at is from Eddie, who is my partner in crime here at NAS Compares. I put him at the top, and I'll be straight with you. This question has a backstory. We had a 30-minute argument on, I believe, Skype, and it was about the name. So this is from Eddie the Web Guy. Hi, Eddie. Eddie the Web Guy. HexOS's name suggests that it's an operating system, but everything up to this point suggests it's just a layer on top of TrueNAS Scale. Is HexOS an OS, or is it just a skin?
It's a great question. I totally appreciate where the question comes from. Unlike Microsoft, I think Linux makes defining an operating system a lot more complicated. All Linux operating systems make use of the Linux kernel. Without the kernel, it's not Linux, but the kernel is used by many different platforms like Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, etc. And these are typically referred to as distributions. And further still, there's plenty of projects that build off of these distributions to create their own offerings, such as TrueNAS Scale and even SteamOS are actually based on Debian Linux. So while Debian's a distribution, some may also call it an operating system in its own right. So when can you really call yourself an OS versus a distribution versus something else entirely? And we think what you call it is dependent on what you're ultimately shipping to the user. And in our case, we are shipping an entire OS. We are most definitely not a skin. When I think of skins, and this is going to show the gray in my beard, but I think a Winamp. That's the first application that comes to mind.
Right there.
Skins are great. I mean, don't get me wrong. I definitely had my fair share of Winamp skins back in the day when MP3s were first becoming cool. But skins are really just more or less alternative presentations of the UI and UX, and they don't really reimagine the entire product. And they don't provide ancillary services or features separate from the original software. So what we are a combination of simplified UI, automations, workflows, managed services to make owning a home server easy. And skins don't do that. But to answer Eddie, and I bet I know where this argument came from, because 10 years ago, I probably would have had the same argument. But the main reason we call ourselves an OS is because it's a lot easier to explain than, well, we're actually a managed services platform for a Linux-based version of the Debian distribution known as TrueNAS Scale. I've already lost my target audience by the time I got to the end of my sentence. So just saying, hey, we're HexOS. We're an operating system for home servers. Probably a lot easier to understand. So that's the reason we call it that way, and we definitely consider ourselves an OS, acknowledging the fact that the vast majority of the underpinnings of our technology is just TrueNAS Scale. We acknowledge that. We're not trying to lie or hide anything around that.
Awesome. Eddie, did you get that? Nice. So real quick, just for the next question, it's something I meant to ask earlier on when you were showing off the early presentation. When the HexOS delivery onto your own personal server is an ISO, so that is just to confirm. So that's TrueNAS Scale, but a modified TrueNAS Scale that's going on there, or the original TrueNAS Scale, but with the command remote. Is it Correct. A particularly curated ISO?
Correct. If you look at our blog post, we have a nice little visual there
nice.
That kind of describes what that is. And basically, our ISO is 90% TrueNAS with a tiny little HexOS connector that gets mapped in there. But I want to be clear, too, and this is an important distinction, especially for IT-centric people. One of the reasons we take this approach also is so we don't have to fork TrueNAS. And the meme that comes to mind is that Lord of Rings meme, one does not simply walk into Mordor. Yeah. One does not simply fork TrueNAS. If you look at the pedigree of the developers behind that project, I mean, they've been building operating systems for over decades now and have more expertise in ZFS than anybody else out there, save maybe Oracle. And I can't imagine trying to take on the responsibility of forking something like that. And so by not going down that path, by creating the hosted UI, we avoid all of that, and we get to get all the benefits of an enterprise-grade platform, but then modify it to suit our target audience.
Awesome, fair play. Okay, you ready for the next question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's rock on. This is Servonomics. I believe he's a YouTuber. How much of the TrueNAS Scale backend are we talking about? Does HexOS give me access to all of the features of TrueNAS Scale, but in a very user-friendly fashion?
So while the entirety of TrueNAS Scale is available to us, we are very focused on the features that are going to be valued most by home users and content creators. It's definitely not in our mission to translate every feature from Scale's web UI into HexOS. And remember, the Scale web UI is just a click away for any missing TrueNAS features that you require. So I think that's I think that's the right approach. I mean, if we could build a better web UI than TrueNAS for everything TrueNAS has, I think we would have just worked for TrueNAS. So,
So, okay, fair enough. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff we've already covered there, but so, for example, someone does want a feature of TrueNAS Scale that isn't available, within a one-click approach within the HexOS dashboard there, what can they do to access that?
So it's the Scale UI is still present at all times in the exact same manner that it is on a default installation. So navigating to the hostname /UI is how you connect, and from there you can leverage any feature that you want. There may be things you can do in that UI that will ultimately break our management. A great example would be deleting our API key. That's a sure way to break management. Yeah. But there might be other things too that if you start poking and prodding in the UI, especially in the advanced sections, and yet you expect us to maintain management for you, that could be problematic. But for most of the things that I think users are going to want to do in that UI, such as maybe configure an iSCSI target or something like that, that won't break anything with HexOS.
Awesome. Okay, next question. This is a long one. Oh, I say the long one. It's the username's longer than the question. At CR Vaughan Williams Bendigo Counsellor, can HexOS be installed on an existing install of TrueNAS Scale, or will it be a completely clean install? And just before we proceed, another user got in contact just a few hours ago. I said I'd sneak this in at Mr. iTunes J Musal. Where are you getting these usernames? Can existing TrueNAS Scale users migrate to HexOS without breaking their stuff, i.e. pools and data? I thought those questions were similar, but not completely similar.
So right now, we're not planning to adopt any existing Scale systems during beta. It is something that we've talked about, but I got to be honest, it's kind of a conundrum, because either you've gotten into Scale and you're far enough along where you've made a commitment to storage and data and apps, and you have something working. And if you're in that state, are you really looking to switch? If you made it that far, you clearly figured out Scale, maybe you're okay. And if you didn't, if you started and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much more than I can handle, I need to abandon, you're probably not far enough along that you need us to adopt what you've done. You just can blow it away and start from scratch. So that all being said, it isn't impossible for us to adopt an existing Scale system. The question is whether or not we should. And the real challenge there comes into the play when there are, again, immutable settings that the user may have configured on their own that don't conform to our best practices. And the question is, do we let the user still enroll and let us adopt that system, even if we know it's not configured in the HexOS way? Or do we tell them, sorry, you need to find a place to temporarily move your data in order to reformat? So it's just not a priority for us in the beta, but it is something that we'll revisit after 1.0.
Awesome. I'd say apropos of that, just before I get to the next question, and again, a lot of people going to watch this are going to have different opinions about everything that's said. I'm just putting it out there. I respect that answer. It would have been very easy for you to go, yeah, sure, we'll take on as many customers as you like. It would have been very easy for you guys to just say, yeah, we don't care if you're TrueNAS. Oh, come over to us, pay us every month or year or whatever. You can tell that question's coming later, everyone. But yeah, I respect that answer. It would have been very easy for you to just go, yeah, one, come all. Open your coffers. At Pentens, how much is going to be silent backend TrueNAS /ZFS feature set, and how much is going to be user controlled, e.g. ZFS snapshots or encryption?
So, I mean, the way that question is phrased, it's a little column A, a little column B, right? I think I understand where it's coming from, and I'll use the two examples that he gives to kind of explain. So with something like snapshots, right? In our mind, snapshots are mostly either time-based or event-driven, and one of those events could be a user self-choosing to take a snapshot in an instance. And so being able to configure what events or what time intervals or how many copies we're keeping, those are things that could be user-controlled. But we definitely want to apply defaults wherever possible. And so like with encryption, there's a scenario where you want to back up data to, say, a buddy. We're nicknaming that buddy backups. And for something like that, I think encryption's required, because a buddy backup without encryption, isn't that just replication? So for us, there's scenarios where we're not going to have to expose that control to the user. It'll just be automated. And then there will be other times where those controls will just be exposed directly. And it's context matters, right?
Absolutely. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, I guess, in different feature sets. Cool. Okay, Pen10, I hope you like that one. Okay, so Hunsil Hun Kill 80 wow. Do you know what? I'm
Hunkley,
sure it's written on
Hunkley
screen.
88, Robbie.
Hunkley 88, man alive, open your eyes, Andrews, it's only 9 p.m. Will applications that are available to simply download and install be curated, or will HexOS have access to the same repositories as TrueNAS Scale?
Great question. So we're definitely going to be curating applications, and non-curated apps could be loaded through the Scale web UI like any other advanced feature that we've talked about. I will say the
Hmm,
ability to install non-curated apps through our UI is still TBD.
cool.
It's a lot out there. There's a lot of potential gotchas with that, and we really just don't want to put the user in a scenario where they're confused or feeling decision fatigue or analysis paralysis. So if we can find a way to do it and support these non-curated apps in a way that's not too obtuse, then we probably will. But I know that our initial approach for at least getting to 1.0, we're very focused on just curating our own apps. But again, drop to the Scale UI. You can add whatever you want.
Absolutely, that TrueNAS Scale button. I think that's going to be a real useful thing. Anyway, no, this actually is a question I've sort of stomped on earlier on, and I know you've also detailed this in previous posts, but I think it's worth reiterating again. This is from @fanboy41. How do they plan to implement remote access?
So there's multiple flavors of remote access when we're talking about that. So there's the two big ones are management and data. So management access we're doing today. That's what deck.hexos.com does. And the beauty of that solution, you don't have to open up a port on your firewall. It's incredibly secure. It's using a secure WebSocket connection to tunnel up. And that's just part and parcel of the service. So by default, you're getting remote management access wherever you are. Doesn't make a difference. Data, however, is a different animal. So today, we do not have a remote access solution for data built into the current beta. It is absolutely on the roadmap, along with apps from a networking standpoint. Piping app traffic through our hosted interface is something that we think we can do pretty easily, but it's not as simple as doing the management through the API for Scale itself. So those are roadmap features, but management access, remote management access is part and parcel of the offering.
Cool. I was going to thought that was going to be my follow-up question, but I'm not going to bother. Hayden Long 3764, how granular will we be able to go with HexOS? I like simplicity, but if I cannot dig deep when I need to, it will be more annoying than useful. From the images posted, it seems like it might be baby's first NAS orientated. Will this be useful for people who are new to the space but still interested in tinkering?
Absolutely. That's Scale web UI being accessible to you. So anything that you want to tweak, I mean, we kind of joked about it internally that the Scale web UI is kind of like developer mode on Android phones. You turn it on and you get all these advanced capabilities that you don't get out of the box. So that applies here as well. So anything that you want to tinker with that's not built into HexOS, Scale UI for that.
Awesome. As you say, we've kind of touched up with the whole TrueNAS Scale button. Okay, next question is from me. It genuinely is, Robbie on the Tube. And this wasn't really a question from me, but it was a recurring statement around some of the original videos before the Q&A was announced. And I just thought it was worth touching on anyway. So @Robbie on the Tube, check me out on Twitter, he said arrogantly, or X, or whatever it calls itself these days. How much development freedom does HexOS have? So, for example, a flexible RAID system comparable to that of Synology Hybrid RAID, or an easy migration tool for users who want to carry over from an existing third-party NAS environment. These are not in TrueNAS Scale, but are there plans for, or the freedom for HexOS to develop features or functions like this in the future?
So I can tell you, we definitely do not have any immediate plans to implement an alternative storage solution. We're huge fans of ZFS. We think that is the right technology for all of our uses right now. And the only feature that we felt was missing when we first embarked on this journey was RAID Z expansion, the ability to add one drive at a time to an existing VDEV, and that's coming. So we don't have any plans to implement anything different from a storage perspective, but we're also not limited by the Scale API in terms of providing additional functionality. And the partnership agreement that we have with TrueNAS doesn't impede our development path or limit us from building additional functionality outside of what's available in Scale itself. So the short answer to your question is we have all the development freedom we could possibly want.
Awesome. That is great to hear. Okay, next question from Captain Magnus. Solid name. Which of these will be supported? Podman, Kubernetes, Incus?
Yep. So
That's how the whole question ends.
yeah, I know. And actually, it's funny. So I responded to this online, but I'm going to have a slightly different, cheekier answer for you today. So Kubernetes is obviously, I already said, it's being deprecated in favor of Docker Compose. It's been public knowledge for some time now. 24.10 will be the first iteration that has Docker. But beyond that, all I can say is that we're working very close with the TrueNAS guys, and they are planning some big improvements, which will be announced in the near future. I really wish I could say more, but somebody with that last name would be very mad at me. So I'm not going to do that right now.
What a Timothy tease. Okay, next question. We'll skip beyond that one. Joseph Tegner. Is any mirror functionality planned? I think you sort of touched about this earlier on, i.e. me and my HexOS friend give each other space on each other's servers for offsite backup or buddy backup.
Yeah. So I'm like jumping out of my chair to answer this one, because this is not only is this a feature, this may have been the feature that allowed me to convince Linus to invest in us originally, because this was one of his wish list items, and it was one of ours as well. What we're calling it buddy backups. I mean, it quite literally is, to me, one of the most important features that we could possibly deliver. And yeah, it's on the roadmap. It'd be really weird if I ended that question with, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah. That would be kind of effed up. But no, yeah. That's great to hear. I mean, ultimately, it's such a demand thing where we're seeing a lot of the turnkey NAS solutions, and it's sort of there, but with caveats, and right. Doing it third party and out there, there's a few roadblocks along the way. So no, that is fantastic to hear.
I'll tell you that one of the themes that I feel a lot of these home server solutions embrace that I disagree with is that every home server is an island. They give you this ability to build your own island. And that's great. I don't get me wrong. Private island sounds great, but I like seeing people. I like people. Like, I'd like to interact, right? I don't want to be on my island by myself. And so our whole idea is, yeah, let's build a private island for everybody, but let's give them ways to connect to one another and extend the value of what that one island can do, right? And so that's a big part of the theme of our product.
Nice. Cool. Okay, next question. This is Snowwild3445. Application certification and maintenance, security, etc. Will users have functionality yet user-friendly control of app permissions, akin to an app on a Google phone which has permission settings?
So literally, the answer is in the question. So our vision for apps is to make the platform transparent to the user and the experience akin to that of a smartphone. We want to personally curate a catalog of apps for users to be able to trust and rely upon for the long haul. I think I answered this in an earlier question, that curation to us means a lot more than just building and maintaining a container. As an example, if you need to have a media library managed from an application like Plex, well, Plex needs a media library to exist first, and a place that you're going to put those media files. And we don't want to ask the user, well, hey, go to this place first, go create a place for that to live, and then go to this place and configure this, and then you can come back and add the app. So tying all of those workflows between the storage, the server, and the app together to streamline that user experience and take a lot of the difficulty and decision fatigue out of the user from being, going through that to set up the app. That's important to us. It's really important to us. And I'll also say that this idea, this concept of making things easier like that, it extends to things outside of the app framework as well. So let's say you have a system that's running, you've been running Plex for a while, and now you're like, you know what? I want to add a graphics card. I want to do transcoding on my GPU. So you shut it down, you reboot with a GPU in the system. We should detect that and prompt you and say, hey, looks like you added some new hardware. Here are some things you can do, and give them the option. Do you want to attach this to Plex? Do you want to create a VM with GPU pass-through? So doing things contextually based on the actions the user takes, both inside our user interface and directly on their hardware, is a part of the mission.
Awesome. You did touch on it earlier on, but I'm glad we addressed it further in that question. Okay, next question. At Praetorian, I'm pretty sure I've not pronounced that right. If I'm capable of using TrueNAS Scale, Docker, etc. already, is there any reason for me to care about this? In other words, how would developers pitch HexOS to tech-savvy people?
So one of the reasons that Eric and I set out to build HexOS was so that we would have a solution we could comfortably recommend to our friends and family that aren't IT minded. This whole thing started for me many years ago when I was still with Unraid, and I was so proud of what we were building. And I had a good friend of mine who was tech savvy, but not IT minded, not an IT centric guy. He's the guy that sets up all the computers for his family, all the smart devices. He knows how to set up VPNs, but he's an air traffic controller. He doesn't work in IT as his day-to-day job. And at the time, I had just built a new Unraid system at home, and I set up a VM and set up, believe it or not, actually virtual reality on a VM with an HTC Vive headset. And we had his family over, and his kid was like, "This is so cool," and he wanted it. And I convinced him, "Hey, man, why don't you go ahead and build it on Unraid, and we'll set it up with the same software I use." And we did. We got it all configured. But about a month or two afterward, he's like, "Hey, can I just reinstall Windows? Like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with this beyond running this VM." And running the VM is just, if that's all you're using it for, it's not as easy as just a regular Windows desktop, right? So that really stuck with me. That really bothered me because we really wanted a solution that we could recommend to people like that. And it was just such a moment for me where I'm like, boom, this is not easy enough. And so he's now coming to me saying, "Hey, when is HexOS going to be ready? Because I now have a real problem. Back then, I didn't have as many photos stored in Google Photos and iPhotos, and my kid's phone is just completely filled up. Now I'm like, every month I'm having to up my cloud storage bill. When is this thing going to be ready?" And I'm so glad that he's excited about it, because I showed him the UI, and he's like, "Okay, this I can get behind." So the answer to the question is, you should care, because I think that the big thing in this space for the longest time is that it's for me, not for thee. And so your friends come over who don't know IT like you do, and they see your Plex setup and they see your home server, and they're like, "It's pretty cool. Can I set this up?" And if you're an IT person, you might recommend it once. And then as soon as you do, now you're on support for that person all the time. You'll never recommend it.
Add on to that, the burnt,
So for me, it's all about creating something that can mask concepts like RAID, parity, caching, all of the things that we know as IT people, but that the average techie YouTuber doesn't know. I would say to Prater, while you might not be a user, if you value your own setup and you want your less IT-centric friends and family to be able to gain similar values, recommend us. That's the answer. That's why you should care.
Cool. I was going to say, I was about to touch on that point on the end there about when you set up for family members and then you are the on-call support. But there you go. You touched it. Nice. Okay, so at David Jones, PI8RL, I was originally a QNAP. I was originally a QNAP NAS device user, then moved to Unraid about 6 years ago. A key reason was the security issues seemed to keep appearing multiple times a year in the late 2010s. Very true. How is HexOS going to balance continued feature updates versus without compromising security and ensuring user trust is kept?
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job in these questions, Robbie, because I'm reading them with you, and I'm like, okay, I think I know what's meant to be said here. So I'm with you.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some words missing in those.
There's some words missing. Yes, go ahead. Yep. No, but I totally feel this question. So we're all too familiar with issues that multiple vendors have had and continue to have relating to timely security, bug fix, and general updates. This is one of the benefits of and reasons why we partnered with TrueNAS. They have decades of experience and a great track record of consistently delivering timely security and maintenance updates for their platforms. And all HexOS stable releases will be based on stable TrueNAS releases, ensuring, well, stability. So, yeah, I think I totally feel where this is coming from. I remember a lot of those stories. There's other vendors I'm not going to shame here, but there are quite a few vendors that have had to be shamed for security issues. And it's the bane of any vendor's existence. And I think that because of the history and the consistency of release schedule that TrueNAS has had, we're not going to be subject to those same concerns.
Awesome. Cool. I was remembering something relatively recently about a Linux kernel that was affecting quite a lot of platforms. And even though a lot of TrueNAS wasn't affected by it, they were very responsive onto what parts that were affected by it. But that's something I might link to in the description on a previous video we did. Next up, at Lucas Medeiros 2471, will it have its own mobile app? I think we've already sort of touched on that, but
yeah, we talked about it earlier. Yes, native mobile apps is absolutely in the works here. We already have a responsive design, so everything is built and ready to be on mobile. But that will come The actual mobile apps themselves will likely come after 1.0. There's a chance we might start work on them before, but they probably wouldn't ship until after 1.0. But that doesn't mean you wouldn't be able to use your phone to drive the entire experience. You just do it through the browser.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Again, we sort of half touched on it already, but I do think it's worth reiterating the point. At Spready, is this a standalone overlay for Scale, or are they working with TrueNAS devs? If they are collaborating with devs, will they have any input on driver development direction?
So we announced our partnership with TrueNAS at the end of July. We've been talking to them a lot longer than that. So for anyone wondering, this is not just a recent decision. And we absolutely communicate and coordinate with them on a regular basis. And while we have some influence on the roadmap, I got to be honest, we're incredibly happy with the direction of Scale's development. And so far, our requests have been few and far between. We haven't really had any need to push for any driver-specific development. As I said earlier, the main thing that we were really focused on from ZFS was RAID Z expansion, a project that they're sponsoring and Clara Systems themselves is helping develop. So that's already checked off in our minds. Beyond that, we've had a couple of small requests. Like we knew with VMs and GPU pass-through that a common need is this patch called the ACS override patch, which again, for our target audience now, we're just geeking out now because nobody knows what I'm talking about now. But the ACS override patch is important to be able to do things like pass PCI devices through to virtual machines in a home server setting, and that just wasn't already baked into TrueNAS. So we made a little request. Hey, can you guys do this for us and give us a way to toggle it and control it? They did that. I think there was another request that they had to expose an endpoint for us to be able to detect the presence of alternative file systems. They did that for us. Beyond that, every time we get to developing something new, there's a giant page of documentation that we have to go through to find, okay, where in TrueNAS can we go do this? And I think it's been only a couple of times where we've been like, oh, there's nothing for that. Most of the time we find that it's already there. So yeah.
I mean, this question came through before the TrueNAS IX Systems announcement. I wanted to include that. The next question, Andreas Grundler. I'm just gonna skip over your question because largely we've already covered it. Your question was about Unraid's ability to use mixed drives and whether that is something that will be integrated into HexOS. But we've kind of already discussed that earlier on.
I can speak.
We'll skip that.
I can speak one thing to this question though, because this was a good question.
Go for it.
Because we don't intend on supporting mixing and matching drives of different sizes. That's just not. It's just not a feature that we think is as important today as it was maybe in 2005, 2014. Drive sizes are not growing at the same rate that they were back when Unraid first came out. Things were doubling every 2 years back then. Certainly not happening like that anymore. And more importantly, mixing and matching drives of different sizes, the way that Unraid does, it comes with significant sacrifices to both performance and functionality. And I think Unraid themselves is acknowledging this, given a recent change in Unraid 7 to demote the array to optional functionality and disable it by default. So we intend to publish a blog in the future that'll serve as a competitive analysis against other players in our space, Unraid being one, and we will dive much deeper into the shortcomings and flaws of the mix and match paradigm.
Cool. I mean, we could do another whole video on the subject of HexOS and Unraid because you are very, very much competing for the same space in some ways. I was going to say, just to add to that, though, when it comes to mixed drives, a lot of the time when I've spoke to people about mixed drives usage in a RAID, it's less about day one. It's about day 1,000 or day 2,000 when they've got an 8-bay, they've half populated it, and they've suddenly realized, well, they don't want to buy the same size drives. That's an example, I think, of a good use of mixed drive expandability there. And I know they can obviously gradually replace drives one by one, and it isn't something that ZFS/TrueNAS has ever engaged with. But I think that's one of the uses for mixed drives in a storage pool that is still quite popular to this day. I agree with you about the whole double drive sizes slowing down. Otherwise, we'd be at 1 billion terabytes. But still, definitely, that's definitely one of the areas where mixed drives are still engaged with in single storage pools quite a lot.
Yeah, and I don't think there's zero value in that feature. I just think once we get into the deep dive of what you have to give up to support that feature, it's not a matter of, well, do I have mixed drives or not? It's, do I have mixed drives or do I want all the capabilities that ZFS has unhindered? And that's the trade-off right now. And for us, we just don't think that giving up the benefits of ZFS makes sense.
Fair enough, makes sense. Okay, next one, nice quick one here at Darren Reed AU. Will there be a simple backup solution with agents for all major OSs, including Linux, Ubuntu, Debian, etc. distros? I mean, again, a nice, simple backup tool there would be great. But where are we at with that on Hex?
So users can expect to leverage backup functionality in three primary ways. One would be backing up data from one HexOS server to another, the buddy backups that we've talked about. Another would be backing up data from devices using native OS agents. And when I say native, I mean by the OS. So Windows has a backup agent, Mac has Time Machine, and you can point those to a SMB share, which we can present through HexOS. So those would be the solutions for those devices. The third would be backing up data to an encrypted cloud storage solution. This would be if you're of the mentality, hey, my most important stuff, yeah, I might back up to a buddy, but I want another copy somewhere else. Maybe you don't back up your entire media library. Maybe you just back up the documents, like your tax documents and stuff like that. So that would be the third backup solution. Anything beyond those primary three is outside of the scope of our roadmap to 1.0. And as I'm sure you and everybody are aware, there is an entire industry of companies who build backup software. So trying to take what an entire industry does and slap it in as a feature seems like a tall ask. That said, we are not ruling out native apps for major OSs, because I actually think there might be some more uses for that beyond just backup. So not going to say anything more today. I know Tommy the Tease or whatever you called me earlier. But yeah, in the future, I definitely think we'll be looking at that more closely.
Fair play. Cool. Next up, at Fedor. Will HexOS allow on? Oh, do you know what? Sorry, I'm going to interrupt my own question here. This is something I said in a video when we were installing TrueNAS on third-party, turnkey NAS solutions, and it was a point that really bugged me. And this rung so many bells when I read it. So Fedor, well on you, mate. Will HexOS allow partitioning install drives not to waste a whole SSD for the boot pool, or allow creation of datasets on the boot pool? Or is it just using TrueNAS as a basis and therefore not providing that functionality out the box?
So I can say short term, there's no plans to change that. The installer itself and what you can do, all of that is guided by TrueNAS, and I think they have probably good reasons for doing it that way. I too, I will say I fully appreciate where this comes from. Not wanting, it's not even just about the capacity, it's also the port, right? You're giving up a SATA port dedicated to the boot device. And so we've had conversations with them about alternative boot methods, but I can't confirm anything today with changing anything with respect to that. It's not something that I would say we would rule out forever. It's not a fight worth fighting for right now. It provides value, but the value isn't as much as the other things we're working on towards 1.0.
It is very much a recurring subject. We're seeing a lot of OS-free NAS, pre-built NAS solutions in the market at the moment. That's a great example, that Ugreen thing. Again, their OS, I don't mind saying this, is lackluster in the extreme, but the hardware is phenomenal. 4 M2 NVMe bays in there, and an additional smaller, I think 2242 SSD bay in there. But the idea I've got to lose one of my 5 SSD bays for an OS is an absolute kick in the nadgers. So I'm with you on that one.
What's the boot device typically on the Ugreens?
The Ugreens, I think they use either a 128. It might even go up to a 512. I know in most turnkey NAS solutions like Synologies and QNAPs, they actually put the OS on the main drives, which again, for lots of reasons, that's not really advisable. So I understand why it needs to go on that separate drive, but it's just they supply an OS drive in this that is being used to barely, I think it's not even 5% capacity on those small drives. I think the bootloader is like 300 megs or something. So it's an absolute killer to lose that drive. And when people go to import, because let's face it, with Unraid, running it from a USB has its pros and cons, but you're not losing a drive bay to it. So I can definitely see the wish behind there for a lot of users to preoccupy and use a little bit more of that capacity. But then, as you say, there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I think the ability to boot from USB would probably be more likely than changing the partition layout on a boot device. And I think that'd be more valuable. The trouble with booting from USB is that I don't think, other than installing an OS, I don't think most component manufacturers really intended for that. And I think that there are a lot of gotcha. I mean, I came from Unraid. I have over 8 years under my belt of supporting booting a server OS from USB, and I can tell you, I got some scars. There are plenty of weird things that can happen when you reboot. And the most common thing that we would see in support is somebody who would email us saying, hey, I'm not at home. I went to install an update. I rebooted the system and it hasn't come back online. Why? And I guarantee you that 99% of the time when that user gets home, they'll see it's stuck at the BIOS because something went wrong and that boot device either dislodged or had a short, or for whatever reason, the BIOS just shuffled around the boot order. I mean, I've seen the weirdest things with this and never seen those issues when you're booting from a hard drive. So that said, I also think booting from USB is something that's more tolerable for a home user, because if that does happen, it's not quite the end of the world. And maybe that's the trade-off. I accept booting from USB is maybe not as reliable. And if the system goes down, I'll have to go physically touch it to fix it. But then I don't have to give up a full regular storage device, a full SATA port or NVMe port. So fighting for that as an option later on would be more likely for us than trying to push for doing anything with boot partitions.
Neat enough. Cool. Okay, next question from Jeremy F. Moses. That sounds like something I'd shout really loud if I hit my hand with a hammer. Will it's a great question. We've all been waiting for this one. If you've stuck around to this point in the video, are you ready? This is the one that you've been shouting at the screen. How will HexOS fund itself going forward? Donations, license fees? If so, any word on the pricing?
You're breaking up. I'm sorry. I got to go, Robbie.
Oh, you're going into a tunnel. Fully expected you to just go, no.
Yeah.
And then just walk off. Sorry.
So while we're not ready to confirm all the pricing specifics today, I can reveal a few details that I think will help satisfy some folks. So the big one is that HexOS will be sold as a lifetime subscription. The lifetime subscription would include features such as connecting to the HexOS command deck, deck.hexos.com, the setup and configuration wizard, anywhere management access, email notifications, folders, users, and storage management, apps, and VMs. So that's the intention for selling HexOS. More detailed information on our licensing and pricing will be revealed soon. But if you listened to the WAN show last Friday, this is obviously a question that everyone has been focused on since we launched. And we just wanted to put this out here so that there's no questions about it. And I think it's even more important now that people know, since we're a hosted UI. I think everyone conflates, it's hosted, therefore it will be subscription. And those two, while they're oftentimes tied together, don't have to be. And in this case, we can absolutely do it this way. So I think that'll help satisfy a lot of the questions from folks out there. And again, we will have more details on pricing very soon.
Excellent. And I think we just lost 70% of the people that just stuck around for that. So for the rest of you that stuck around, thanks, guys. You got me. So next question. At Mar77 Evalet, support model. How will end users get support? And will it arrive with a free or tiered pricing, community support, admins, etc.?
So free support for HexOS will be obtainable through community channels such as our forums and Discord server, which will be launching soon. But we do have longer term plans to offer premium support options, just not ready to reveal those details yet. And to be honest, those probably wouldn't launch until after 1.0 release anyway.
Awesome. Cool. I should have just tacked on to the other question. Okay, we've only got a couple of questions left on here. So at Lord Aphothis 100, that sounds Greek. Will there be any upgrade path to vanilla scale if a user outgrows HexOS and wants more control or advanced features?
So absolutely. We see this going both ways, right? So if you're not savvy enough, you should be using HexOS. But if you're too savvy, you probably should be just using TrueNAS Scale. And unlike the reverse scenario where if you're using Scale and you want to go to HexOS, there might be scenarios where we don't want to adopt you. In reverse, you can always move to Scale, always. So, if maybe you start with us like baby's first NAS brought up and you're really happy with everything. And then as the years go on, you realize now I want to be an IT professional, and you start configuring all this advanced stuff. And you get to a point where you say, I don't need this anymore. I can do it myself. Fine. That's totally fine. And we fully support that use case. Our view, and a big part of why we've taken the approach we have specifically for content creators, is the journey. when you're starting out and you're trying to build content, you don't have a giant purse to go dive into to get your Scrooge McDuck money and go buy a big server and do all this crazy stuff. In fact, the most money you're probably going to spend is going to be on your capture equipment to get better quality. And so for us, the problem with those folks is they usually end up grabbing that, Ghostbusters traps full of external hard drives and running through the house with that. And we've seen plenty of creators go down that path, and it's not tenable. And then when it's time to finally adopt something that's better, the options are just either really expensive and frankly kind of gimped hardware, or do it yourself and you're left kind of having to figure everything out on your own. So for us, it's all about the journey. So you can start with something as simple as just, I have an old PC laying around. Let me turn it into a server. Okay, great. Now I can turn it into an editing workstation too by running a VM with GPU pass-through. Maybe I hire some additional editors at one point and I throw additional GPUs in, and each of them gets their own editing VM, and I can install things like Parsec and give them remote access, right? And then maybe I become LTT one day and I have a studio now and I have so many employees that this little custom built box that I built 5 years ago doesn't cut it anymore. Well, go buy yourself a proper server, go move all your storage devices over to it. And then if you want, just start using TrueNAS Scale. That's totally fine. So having a migration path to take you from, I've been on this journey with HexOS so far and it's been great, but now I'm at the point where I need to put on my big boy pants and hire an IT admin and build this thing, with a little bit more oomph behind it. Then that's obviously available to you. So that's important to us.
Awesome, great answer. And final question. It's another one that people have been waiting for. At Martin334, ETA on the beta.
So we're still on target to get our first test users in Q3. It will be a smaller group to start, and we'll put out details on how you can get into that beta fairly soon as well. But most of the beta period is going to go from Q3 through Q4.
Ambitious.
I think I gave you more of an answer to that question than was asked, but I figured that would be a follow-up. So
why not? Why not? It's the internet. There's loads of internet. We can just keep talking.
That's right.
But no, that is it, everyone. We have reached the end of the questions. Before you go into the comments and say, why didn't he ask that question? Then perhaps the reason I didn't ask it is you didn't ask it either. So if you do have any follow-up questions that maybe we haven't covered, or maybe expanding on the points that we've talked about, put them down below. And if there's enough, maybe we'll do this again, or John will pop down there himself and answer them. Of course, there is still the Reddit thread. There's going to be lots of different means of communication by the sound of things. So head over to those and I'm sure you'll get answers. But apart from that, thank you so much for your time today, John. Seriously, we've been on the call now for about 90 minutes. A lot of build up before this, setting up our mics and lights and stuff. But yeah, fantastic stuff. Cheers for all your help today. Again, there should be a written article with a lot of the answers today, all detailed out, linked in the description below. And again, thanks to everyone for your questions and how badly I've pronounced your names. I apologize. But yeah, great. Thanks for joining us today, man. I look forward to seeing this software in action.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
No worries, man. Cool. Have a great weekend, guys.